Hello. I timed that terribly. Hi everybody. I'm so happy to have you all here. I see some familiar avatars from this morning. It's good to be back. This is Design in 7 Q&A round 2. Very exciting. For folks who weren't here this morning, my name's Tane Danger. This is the part of the experience where I just sort of riff for 30 seconds to a minute to stretch out time and tell all the people who were waiting until 12:30 to actually sign into the Zoom actually do sign into the Zoom. It's great. This is fun. I don't know. I like doing this part. Maybe, and I have this feeling that like people hate it. That I just no. I'm getting shakes and nods. This is good. This is the kind of feedback I need. I love it. It's just really nice to see other humans. Really, in almost any context these days, I'm so happy to be interacting with anybody other than my cat who is sleeping here. Was very nervous during the last session. The cat was George is my cat, was very talkative at the beginning. I thought he was going to interrupt the whole thing, but then he just came and went to sleep, and he's been here ever since. So, all right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. This has been a Q&A session about my cat George. Okay, so I'm gonna get us rolling now. So my name is Tane Danger. I am very happy to have you all here. This is a special thing that we are doing this year. So Design in 7 is a fantastic program that has actually been going on for more than a decade at the University of Minnesota School of Design, where we invite 7 brilliant speakers to give talks that have to be 7 minutes or less. And we try and set them up to cover the whole gambit of the 7 schools within the College of Design. Normally, in the past, we've done this in person at the university. It's very exciting, but obviously with COVID and everything, we decided it is much safer and much better to do it online this year. One of the nice things about that is that we know that we have folks who are both able to watch and this year actually participate who wouldn't have probably been able to if we had been on campus at the university, because people can now both tune in and Zoom in from just about anywhere. So that's very cool. And then this event right now is something that we also have never done before, where we are opening it up to spend about an hour with our speakers asking them some questions. We did this morning with 3 of our speakers. We have got 4 more of them with us this afternoon. And I will just say right now, and I'll probably mention this a couple of times, I would really love for this to be overwhelmingly driven by you all in the audience in terms of what you want to hear from our fabulous speakers. Hopefully you've all gotten a chance to see their talks online at this point. So if you have a question, 2 options here. You can post the question in its entirety in the chat if that's more comfortable for you, and then I will read it. Or if you just want to post in the chat like, oh, I'd like to ask a question, then I will just actually turn it over to you and trust that you're not going to Zoom bomb us. I don't know. Do people still do that? That felt very like early pandemic. I haven't heard about it as much.
Wait, hold on. I might be missing out on something. What is Zoom bomb?
I was going to ask the
Zoom
same
bomb.
thing.
Zoom bombs are when you would have a Zoom and somebody who wasn't supposed to get the link for the Zoom would get it, and then they would come into the Zoom and they would do something very inappropriate or bad somehow to try and mess up your Zoom.
Not in this Zoom.
Not in this Zoom. Brian and Lori are here. They have got the power to kick people into the waiting room if they have to. Okay. We got to get started. All right. So, Bo, since you already have spoken up, do you mind? I am going to ask each of our panelists to just introduce themselves. Tell us your name. I've been saying sort of how you introduce yourself at a party in regard to design. Anything else you want us to just know right off the bat. So hopefully you've already seen, she was actually our closing talk for the Design in 7. But Bo, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I would love. Hi, my name is Bo, and typically how I introduce myself at parties is hi, my name is Bo, and I start asking questions right away. Behind me here, I have my dog Wallace. He'll be, walking back and forth between my room and the balcony. So
That's
nice to meet
awesome.
you all.
All right, thank you so much, Bo. And we should say, just to induce jealousy, that you are zooming in from San Diego, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And
Yeah,
it's
and
about
just
60 something degrees today.
that sounds nice. Great. Okay, Catherine, how are you? Can you please say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Catherine. I typically introduce myself as a designer. Obviously, specifically, I'm a clothing designer, but I'm really excited about and passionate about the way things work and how things are designed to be used. And if we were at a party, I'd probably start talking to you about that. So,
Okay, Reginaldo, if you are willing to jump in next.
Yeah, hi everybody. Reggie Reyes, my name. He, him, his pronouns, and I describe myself as a designer, or introduce myself as a designer. I know I have a VP title, but that doesn't really mean anything to me. And it means I'm a leader, but I really focus on design and the process. And like Catherine, you know, understanding what design is and what you are able to touch, because that really connects us. And yeah, designer.
Very cool. Thank you so much for that. And last and certainly not least, Spencer, will you say hello for everybody?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm LaSpencer Walker. I would say I'm an engineer with creative tendencies. I walk in a room and do the whole engineering, like what's more efficient here? How'd they make that? What material is that made with? And then layer it with, did you think about your color theory? Did you think about form language? So I love meshing the two worlds we get together because it's how I operate. It's how I live.
Very cool. This is great. And that is actually a great segue into how I was interested in starting this whole thing. I'll just say one more time for folks who just came in. We're really hoping this is largely driven by your questions for our four panelists. So if you have questions, you can either just post in the chat, oh, I've got a question I'd like to ask, and I'll turn it over to you. Or if you are more comfortable, just posting your entire question and then I can read it for our panelists. But to get started, this came up in the session we did this morning, and folks were very interested in how you think about sort of that design process actually showing up in your work. And the sort of context for this was we have a lot of folks here who are either students or alum. We spend a lot of time in design school learning the design process. And then it's sort of this question of, okay, but how does that actually work, like in real life? And maybe I'd ask each of you if you can say a little bit about how that actually shows up, or maybe ways it might not always show up. I don't know, Reggie, you were in the first session. You were a participant, so you kind of have a head start. Do you mind kicking us off?
For sure. You know, the process and design come hand in hand for me. I was educated in interior architecture and architecture, and that sense of curiosity for me just comes naturally of asking questions, not just in the beginning, but like throughout. And, you know, like Liz Spencer was talking about, like challenging throughout the process. And with those questions and curiosity, I think solutions come to the table or come to light. I always think about the end goal too. I'm kind of like that strategic right brain, left brain thinker, and knowing where you want to go helps me and the teams kind of figure out how we want to get there without being very pragmatic or programmatic about it. And it allows us to be free in figuring out what that design is and getting to that solution in a way that you may not even expect, which is what I love about the design process, because you know it is about being iterative, and it's being about being open and being open to things that you may not think is the right solution, but there are nuggets of things along the way that get you there.
That's very good. I mean, there's a lot more to dig into there, but maybe we can go around once with everybody and just sort of see what you're thinking. Spencer, I see you nodding your head, so do you mind jumping in?
Yeah. And I think a lot of what Reggie said I resonate with. And for me, the design process really starts with like empathy and context. And I've learned that through my career, but I didn't know that about me until it came alive in my career. And I think Target does a good job doing that. Like, who's your guest and how will you serve them? And those are just words. But then when you actually talk to someone, you're face to face with someone, you're in their home, and you're like, okay, so there's an issue here. You have nowhere to store your stuff. Tell me about that. And just having that conversation and understanding and living through their eyes and living in their shoes, or just what's happening around us. Understanding empathy is very strong. You need to have that muscle to do anything, to create an experience, to create a product, to create love in the world. You have to understand where people are coming from, and having empathy is strong when you design anything.
Oh my God, Liz Spencer, you are singing my song. I love this so much. I want to talk about empathy all day, but I'm going to go to Catherine first. Catherine, do you mind sharing a little bit about how design process shows up both in the actual stuff that you make, but then just also sort of in your work, having a business and sort of on a day-to-day?
Totally. I mean, I resonate a lot with, what's been said already, especially with like the empathy piece, because even within the clothing industry, I worked at Target also. So I had that like large industry, and now I own this like small clothing brand. So it's very tiny. And the design process looks very different, like in those two different like work environments. So I think part of what I really loved about the design process with Winsome is that like direct connection with customers and people who are wearing the clothing, and especially having like the design studio in the store. I get to like watch people try things on all day. So it's been the best way to be able to constantly be like reiterating. And along with that, I think that what I learned of the design process when I was really young was that it was some sort of like specific funnel or straight line. And yeah, you could like go back and do a step over again, but you had to follow this specific process. And I just don't think that that's completely accurate. I think in most design, like if it's worth doing, it's probably never done, because we're like learning new things all the time. And, technology is advancing and developing. And so just the freedom to be able to say like, okay, this can constantly be improved, or we can go back and try it again, or whatever else, just feeling like it is pretty fluid, and that there isn't like necessarily a specific end goal in like the entirety of like the business. Even though projects come to a close, it's always helpful to kind of like reflect on what went well and what didn't. So yeah.
That's brilliant. And I saw both Reggie and Liz Spencer were doing lots of hand motions to back you up on the notion that the design process is not always, or even maybe often, linear. Sure. Bo, can we check in with you about how that design process just sort of shows up for you?
Yeah, I mean, and not to plug my own talk, but to me, really everything is iteration, both in the professional sense and personal sense. And I think for me, what stood out was that, understanding that like you learn something from everything, especially in the design process, and like let you to the next thing. Like it's not going to be linear, that some of the element that you try now might work, but not completely, and you have to pivot some. But like the process will lead you where you need it to be, and being open to that possibility. I think that was super important. But for me personally, the difference was the empathy element that Liz Spencer was talking about. And I'm lucky that has been the core thing of what I do now at Target, is to get to talk to the guests, understanding their stories, and in turn, amplifying their voices in the way that our design teams and engineer would understand and able to address those needs. And for me, the pivot was when, being trained as a design student, right? Like so much of it was about you and what you understand of what you want the design to be. And the moment of pivot to like, okay, now it's not about you anymore. Like now you're being challenged to design for someone else. And like having to understand what they need, the life they go through, like the end use and what it might be, like the whole entire cycle. I think it's just like such a beautiful challenge for designers to like remove themselves partially out of it, but still in a way, having their voice on top of the things that they're working on.
Yes.
So we're starting to get some questions in the chat, but I can't let us go without digging in a little bit more to this empathy piece because I think it's so important, and basically all of you have talked about it at this point. So we've all identified it's really important. My question is, how do you maintain it and build it as a muscle, right? Like, how is it that you take sort of, okay, I know that I need to be empathetic and be able to put myself in a customer or a client or another person's shoes. How do you actually manifest that? How do you exercise that in a way where you can do it over and over and when you need to? I'll just throw that open for anybody. Right?
I'd love to talk a little bit about that. I think it's interesting actually that all 4 panelists have some Target experience. And there's an element of working for a large corporation like that where you're not necessarily trained to do it, but you learn it through the process. And whether you're having a guest in mind or that final user or a client, in my case now, is that muscle just gets stronger. Because I think for me, it's that curiosity and wanting to know more. And when you start asking those questions, you build these relationships, whether they're for the guest or your team or clients, and they respect you in a way that you're challenging them in a different way that they're never challenged in their day-to-day. Asking about those why, who, what, how, things that they never really ask themselves. And a role of us as designers is this sociology aspect to that. And I think we bring to the table this sense of curiosity and wanting to know more and going deeper into those solutions that our clients or guests, whoever we're solving for, would never ever think about. And I think that empathy piece is a core to that. And I think it's just one of those core things as designers that we have, whether you know it or not, as you go through.
Yeah. It's amazing when you're uncomfortable and how that comes out. When you put yourself in vulnerable situations, you're like, well, I have to listen. And if you don't do that enough, then you probably won't be able to design something that will be driven on empathy or driven by empathy. Yeah. So like you said, Tane, like, what do you do to exercise that? Put yourself in uncomfortable situations, listen, take it all in, and then act. And you'll see some pretty amazing things.
Yeah, I think to add to that too, and when I was a really young designer, I felt like I was always designing for me because I knew me and I understood that very well. But now I know that it's not, is not about me at all. Designing is about designing for everybody else. And recognizing that you don't immediately have all the answers, and then just personally for me, exercising that muscle, it is about being able to talk to people face to face. Like I really value those, personal connections and being able to ask direct questions, and
And if I can push just a little bit on that, because and I don't want to speak out of school, but Catherine, you admitted before we started that you're a bit of an introvert to some degree. Thank you for being on a panel in front of a bunch of strangers, by the way. But I am curious, like, if that's something then that you had to like learn or practice, like being comfortable doing that kind of work differently.
Yes and no. I mean, talking to, especially not being able to see anyone's faces is really nerve-wracking, but even though I'm introverted, I really value one-on-one conversations and connections, and I think that's why I maybe thrive in a smaller, more independent environment, or working, even though it's my company, like working at a small company. But I think it is work too, and it's not again, it's not about me. And I think recognizing that, and recognizing that like this is my job, and it's what's required of me, and a little bit to what Spencer was saying is like leaning into that discomfort a bit. I recognize that that's how to keep growing and keep moving forward, even though it does feel super uncomfortable sometimes. So
But were you about to jump in?
Oh, I wasn't, but I can.
Oh, it's up to you.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And for me, it's a large part of that is also checking your ego at the door, and not just, for me, it's like the ego of wanting to be right when I do a project. I think like I want it to be the best thing ever. I want to get it right. And having to acknowledge that at times it will probably be the worst thing you ever created. And that's okay, because then next time it's going to be better. And like getting comfortable with that idea that not everything that come out of you or your ideas, like not all of your ideas are good ideas, and be okay with that.
Call it the fine art experience where you're like, look at it. No one likes it. I didn't ask. I didn't get any inputs. I didn't feel the crowd. Okay, darn.
As a longtime stage performer, that hits close to home. So there's there's a bunch of questions, but there's a very good follow-up question here from Mi Zhang in the chat, who asks about how your individual identities and past experience have impacted you and your new experiences in the design world. And I speaking for myself, I would project, assume that ties in some ways to what we were just talking about, that your identities and sort of Reggie in particular, I'm thinking in your talk, you talked about code switching and learning how to do that and how that's actually aided you in some of the work that you do. And so responding to Mi's question, but then also just how you think about those two things reconciling.
Oh yeah, like, for me in my talk, I talked a little bit about having to figure it out in a way. And as an immigrant kid, oldest of four, the oldest of four in a Filipino Catholic family, like to put more context to that. And if you know out there, but like, I had to, figure it out from the get-go, like figure out how to learn English. And I watched Sesame Street along with all my children, if you guys know that soap opera back in the day, and coming to the table with answers and solutions because I wanted to fit in. And I think for me in my career, it was all about that in the back of my head of wanting to be 5 steps ahead of everybody else so that I could be perceived as being at the same level. And what I found out through my career, it really was about, I knew my shit already. I didn't have to prove anything. It's just to be myself, to come to the table with who I am and what I can do. And, the recognition will come. And it's not that I would seek the recognition, but it's something, we as designers want to feel a little bit valued in a way, because what we do is valuable to, our clients, our consumers, who have you. And I think, that identity of mine and my background has really played a big part of how I approach design and how I approach life, and also just connecting with people. It's, in that way, you're wanting to know more about people, and that connection and that empathy, it goes back to that again, right? It's once you figure that out, I'm an extrovert, but I always see myself as an introvert. And my partner always gives me a lot of shit about you're not an introvert at all. And I own that now. There's parts of me that want to be an introvert, but I'm a total extrovert, and I want to ask. I want to be curious. I want to connect.
Anyone else kind of want to jump in on that question that we have in the chat about your identity and past experiences impacting how you approach design?
Yeah,
Sure.
I think. Oh, go ahead, Catherine.
Oh, sure. I've talked about how my mom is an artist and my dad is a scientist, so I feel like design is kind of the combination of the two. So I always grew up with an appreciation for both art and science, and specifically too, my dad is an environmental scientist, so just like the idea of our impact on climate and climate change and sustainability have always kind of been front of mind. But I also had a really influential experience working at a cafe in South Minneapolis called the Common Roots Cafe. And they did a lot of that farm to table before it was super popular. And I remember the owner always talking about how, if somebody wants a burger and they want to know exactly where it came from, we want to provide that for them. But if somebody also just wants a really good hamburger and they don't care, we're going to provide that for them also. And I kind of like that perspective of like, yeah, I'm going to do it right. But I also want to make something really wonderful and valuable that just also happens to come from a really wonderful place. So yeah, I just find myself kind of thinking about that statement all the time and thinking about hamburgers.
Good. Bo, do you want to jump in?
Oh, I'm good. We can go ahead with the next question.
Okay.
I got something.
Okay,
I
yeah,
think,
go ahead.
Like I would do this if everybody was live. I'd be like, show of hands if you're from Minnesota. Like I'm not. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. And I think being from the South and the pressure, but yet honor to kind of do something that would make my city, my state proud. That's always something that's in the back of my head. But I relish and I celebrate that because the people who came before me gave me the opportunity to do that. So making sure that I am thoughtful and I am persistent in doing something that would, I think in my talk, make an impact. I think that's why it's so heavily rooted in me, because of my upbringing and celebrating who I am based on where I came from.
That's amazing. I again could talk about this stuff all day, but I will. I'm going to go back to some of the questions that we have. There's a question here from Michelle. Sorry, Megan asked a question first. How do you, as a designer, maintain a healthy creative practice separate from work job? Something that has plagued me a lot is creative burnout while in school. Again, this is something that we talked about a little in the first session, and I'm really curious about you all, because obviously the empathy piece, the creativity piece is central to everything that you all do, and maintaining that flame, keeping that thing on fire so that you're able to tap it when you need to, is work. And so how do you do that? How do you keep that creative practice space for yourselves?
I'm going to answer that question. I struggled with that for a long time as well myself. But I think for me, the root cause of that problem that I faced was more like the pressure for me to practice creativity in the way that creativity was understood, right? Like it's the pressure that I had in myself to like do the design related work that if I don't, then I'm failing myself. And I think once I understand the role of it, that's like, no, creativity is really everything and anything. And like now I don't design jewelry anymore. I don't really draw as much as I used to, but my creativity comes in more like when I make food, when I experiment with things. And I think giving myself that grace and, understanding of, I still have that need and the feeling of being creative, but it just manifests in a different way than what I understood. Like that for me, give me the energy to continue doing whatever it is that makes me happy at that moment. And if and when one day, I want to draw again, design things again, and that's okay too. But if I don't right now, that's okay as well, because it just look different.
Anyone else got tips for us who are struggling to maintain that creative energy?
I love how you mentioned like it doesn't have to directly tie to what you do, but like it's finding something that makes you happy. And I'm a huge movie. I wouldn't call myself a buff, but I take it all in. Like I watch a movie and I separate from the world, and I'm like, this Christopher Nolan movie is going to inspire me to be the next film artist. Like, yeah, I may not do that exact same thing, but I'll bring the things that I've learned or at least enjoyed to my work. And be like, oh, how do I tell people or bring them on a journey like Christopher Nolan did through Inception, or teach history or science through whatever I'm doing the way Christopher Nolan did. But just being inspired by something I truly love. Like I miss movie theaters, and I used to be the guy who would go to a movie by himself and no one else in the audience, just be like, yeah, let's do this. But just finding that moment to kind of separate from the world and say like, I'm going to be inspired by this.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add too that for me, it's been about giving myself permission to just like turn off too. I feel like there's so much pressure to constantly be exploring and constantly be curious. And I felt for a long time like, yeah, even the movies I chose had to be, particularly inspiring. And And then I found solitaire on my phone, and I realized like sometimes I just need to play solitaire on my phone. You know, it's not particularly creative or exciting, but just allowing myself to turn off and to not be creative has helped me to be so much more creative when I have the energy for it too.
Yeah, and for me, the things that stops me a lot from being creative or having that burnt out was the need and the feeling that I have to do it well. So then when I'm inspired and I'm like, oh, I want to do this, but then it would not be as good. And that like stops me from doing. I think ever since I give myself permission to be really bad at it was when I'm like, really creative. I mean, even, you know, like giving the talk for Design 7, I was really scared, but I told myself that, well, why don't I just take this as like, you know, if I'm going to be the worst speaker out of the 7, that's great. We're doing something. I'm making other people look better, you know, let's just go at it.
And that was a part of your talk, Bo, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to say a little bit more, because I resonated with that about you giving yourself permission to not do something perfectly, to actually maybe do something badly. And I'm like, that sounds great. How do I do that? Like,
yeah, I honestly, you just have to. As in like, people don't have to approve of your work, especially you, right? Like sometimes you just gotta let yourself create and just produce things, and to like stop yourself from even judging it, you know, to say that, oh, that sucks, why are you doing that? But more like, well, it has to come out, so I'm just gonna let it come out and we'll revisit it later.
Absolutely. And I think in this like day of social media and Instagram, not all of it needs to be shown either. Like
Right,
so much of
exactly.
your work can just be for you, and you don't have to be creating things for other people.
this is my quick hot take, which is that the world would probably be a slightly better place these days if a lot of us started using a diary in place of Twitter sometimes. Okay, I have another question here, which is related to the importance of empathy. Why is while user experience is popular in the tech space, I also find it to be a strong vessel for infusing empathy into one's entire practice and mindset. How often, if at all, do you find yourself using UX practices in your spaces?
Oh, this is a hot topic in the agency I work at, because we have UX designers and we have, like for me as an environmental designer, like experience has always been a part of my core in design. And I think having that mindset is really critical in the process of design, whether you're doing it from a website to building an environment. And I always say, like, you know, as our role as designers, especially for me, is that I look at things from a 4-inch component all the way to a 4,000 square foot component, where you're making sure that all those different touch points are consistent to the brand, the brief, and to your final solution. And there's opportunities within that experience that you can veer off. And I think it's okay to do that as long as you kind of bring it back to what your directives are, right? And I think that UX to physical experience is one and the same. I think it's just a matter of how you translate it and what kind of medium it comes out of, because, you know, I work a lot with our web developers and designers, and that UX component is basically programming in my head, of programming a space from the moment somebody comes to the parking lot, actually from the moment somebody engages on a mobile device to a parking lot to a space and then goes home. Those are all the things that you need to have as a filter, and experience can really be taken through any kind of expertise or skill set.
That's great. Wow. It was. Did you set somebody up to ask that question?
No, but it's something that we've been talking a lot about. And like, you know, when we talk with clients, I always want to make sure when we talk about experience, we're talking about a total experience, and UX is a part of that. But there's a physical experience that also integrates within that. That's just as important. You know, and in the marketing world, experience is such a term now in roles, and it really boils down. Like this goes back to the empathy aspect, the empathy journey, consumer journey, however you want to call that user journey. It's understanding those moments in time of like how people or things are interacting with your design.
Yeah, and we got a comment earlier when we first started talking about empathy from Terry, who said empathy is deeply important and limited. We need to also do research when designing for folks whose experience is not familiar to us. So I'm thinking that probably ties in with some of these questions about user experience. And for Spencer, Catherine, Bo, if you have thoughts on sort of that intersection between empathy, user experience, and just the research of trying to put yourself and understand how someone else might interact with what you're creating.
Well, it's like consistent selflessness. If, like to Reggie's point, if you're consistent in the way that you show up, thinking about someone else, then the entire experience is well-rounded. But if there's a disjoint experience, or you're not all going to the same North Star, if you will, it'll feel like a left turn, and someone's going to go, this experience doesn't make any sense, or this experience doesn't make me feel good. So you have to consider the entire piece and remaining consistent. And it does take diligent work. Like you can't just say, yeah, this is what we're going to do, and you don't talk about it ever again.
Right.
To bring it up, got to keep bringing it back.
I don't know how much this answer relates to the question, but I think providing, the customer or the guest or the user different ways to provide feedback to, I found to be really helpful, because not everyone that walks into the store and tries something on is going to be like, I don't like this, and this is why. I wouldn't do that, being introverted. So, having surveys, or, answering emails or direct messages, like providing people different avenues to, express what they want and need, I've found is very helpful too in the work that I do. So
I'm a comedy writer on the side, and I'm just imagining the sketch of like this store that people walk into and are 100% honest from beginning to end. It's like both terrifying and also probably you'd get a lot done. So
it's helpful. Yeah. I mean, some people do. And it's you can learn a lot from it.
It reminds me of working at Abercrombie and Fitch in high school. And the tagline was like, have you tried on our jeans? And someone would be like, no. And that was it.
That's fantastic. There's a question a little bit earlier here that might be a segue from what we were talking about, might just be a good jumping off point to something else to talk about, which is Missy asked, how do you turn constraints into opportunities? Which is something I'm very interested in. I actually, just speaking for myself, find like a totally blank page, a client who says, do whatever you want, as actually the most paralyzing thing in some ways of all. So, but what about you all? How do you think about that question of turning constraints into opportunities?
Go ahead, Bo.
I love it. I love open-ended things. For me, constraints in itself, I always see constraints as opportunities. That it's like, if we don't know the answer to it, it just hasn't been done before. Yeah, it just opens so many doors that, both challenging and beautiful. I'm like losing my voice here. But for me, constraint is just giving that extra layer to challenge and be like, oh, like instead of you feeling like you're stuck, it just kind of pose a different question of now you're being faced to find different solutions that you don't know existed. And for me, that's all it is.
Well, maybe to put that's beautiful and very helpful. And I'm wondering if just to put some tangible pieces around this, the last year has been full of all kinds of new constraints for all of us in all kinds of different ways. And it almost certainly has led us all to be creative and figure out new ways of being and doing and connecting than we ever have before. And so I'm curious if those constraints of a pandemic and living in a virtual world and everything else that has happened in the last year plus, like, have got you operating differently, working differently, changing how things that you've done turn out?
I think in my younger years, I used to say I was a rebel without a cause. And I would just blow it up for no reason. Like, just figure it out. This is in my way. Boom. But to be, tangible, like you said, we've had to learn from those constraints and be kind of like a detective and say, well, how do I get through this? Or what is really the root cause of this? And then that's another way to bust it open and make it into an opportunity. Like, oh, it's not actually the wall, it's the foundation that I need to just change. And now the wall opens. And just really taking the second lens, even third lens, and saying, what is this constraint really?
Yeah, I love that, Spencer. I remember talking to someone and we were just, like stupidly arguing on things that didn't matter. Like we were like, okay, if I put you in a room and the door is locked, how will you get out? And we're like, well, there's window. And then they're like, well, what if window's locked? Then we're like, well, we'll just, I don't know, like find a key to open the door. And then like, what if there's no doors and windows? And we're like, oh, why would you put yourself there in the first place? Like dug a hole through the ground or something. And it's just that, right? It's like constraint is there, but there are also like a different way out that you didn't think of.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Constraints can be like a jumping off point and offer some direction. This might be getting a little personal now, but I've been going to couples therapy during pandemic, which has been hugely helpful. And I hope this resonates with many people, but that like, what do you want to have for dinner question that comes up, and every time you want to rip your hair out. But our therapist said something to us like, why don't you start with just like the one place you don't want to go? And it was amazing how helpful it was to just say like, okay, well, I don't know what I want for dinner, but I know I don't want this. I feel like that relates somehow.
Yeah, that is great, and I am going to 100% use that. It's like fabulously tangible.
Yeah. Well, I think, building on that, Catherine, I think, when you aren't given constraints, you actually end up giving yourself constraints because you start asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all have talked a little bit about this in terms of like, even though we're given like blue sky, we start asking the questions that give a little bit more constraints so you can come to a solution. And those constraints, to Catherine's point, it really builds on an opportunity that you may not have thought of if you were given it.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, right? Like, it's like, here's your constraint, now build it, but we're working on this next project and you're going to have nothing. Then those questions become really important, and that curiosity starts taking over.
Absolutely. Yeah, it just gives you somewhere to just start digging in, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a big question here, which I'm going to put y'all. So Michelle asks, what role do designers take in creating a more equitable world, especially considering that designers don't work in a silo and need to accommodate customer, cost, time restraints? I mean, there's a lot to bite off there, so maybe I'll just put it out there and see where we go to start.
I can start with this question. I think because it's something that I think about like daily, and it's been such just an ongoing like question or like struggle in the business, because I try to, with Winsome, we try to focus on like sustainable and ethical design. I think my short answer is that it's every situation is a little different, and I think trying to make like a blanket statement for everything that we do is just like an unfeasible way to work. But I do think that like figuring out what priorities are and what order has been super helpful. So yes, I like to focus on like sustainable and ethical design, but I'm going to put like ethical number one. So my employees come first, and if I need to make a business decision that then is between something either more sustainable or more ethical for like their health and safe and friendly working environment, I'm going to choose them. So that's been really helpful. Also, just trying to like ask myself, am I doing the absolute best I can with the time, materials, and resources available to me? Because again, I guess with those like limitations, you know, there are constraints, and I have constraints in the business. And so I think constantly reflecting on like, okay, is this the best that I can do? That's been helpful.
Yeah. For me, I think about the equity within the creative and design community. And really for me, it means like being there and being present for informationals and people who may look like me, but don't know that there are professions within design and creative communities that you can succeed, right? So like, I've always had a soft spot because it's like this is going back to my experiences. Like I had never met a designer that was like me, like Asian, had a brown face, and most of my interactions have been, through a medical profession, which my parents were at, and I thought I would be in that track, but I had this interest in design and architecture, and through that way, never really met another Asian designer that I could look up to in a way. And so the equity piece is being available for designers of color and being able to ask or get information of my experience that could help them through their own experiences. And I usually said, and this has happened like since my Target days, but Fridays were always a time for me to block out my morning for informational get-to-knows, as we talked at Target on Fridays, of designers or other people that want to know how I got to where I am, right? And at Target, at that time, in PD&D, for example, it was just a handful of us creatives of color in a way, and like we had to like understand and know where we came from to actually understand who we were. And for me, it was really giving back in that way. And I talked a little bit in the talk about just being there for others, and just that time commitment is so basic, where from an equity standpoint, it's really like being there and giving back through mentorship or just being there just to listen. We do a lot of work with the Brand Lab and Juxta in the agency that I'm at. And those experiences and relationships have been so fruitful for me, along with, kind of my MCAD U of M kind of mentorships that have formed along the way. And that's my view of equity in terms of like how I can give back and through my experiences that way.
Yeah, there's so many terms in that just one question: equitable, accommodate, consider. And my line of work at Target is consistently evolving, whether it's working on Black History Month or this new position that I'm actually just got into. And it's understanding how to build equity from access, financial, to Reggie's point, just seeing someone who looks like you, representation, and understanding that we have an opportunity to allow that access to grow. So what role do we play in creating that equitable lifestyle for inclusive across the board? And I've always said the thing about relentlessly inclusive. That doesn't just mean making myself better and those who look like me, but in order to do that, I have to highlight, again, going back to empathy, understanding what lived experiences outside of my own or people who look like me, so we can do it together and lift each other up to create a more equitable landscape, but knowing and identifying and being very declarative that there's an issue here. Yeah. And understanding and doing your research to understand what is the issue. And then that same model couldn't be applied. But if you don't declare what that issue is, then you can't create a model to solve it.
Right. And for me, like understanding the impact of your work as well, I like to compare it to like sustainability, for example, right? Like back in the day, we didn't understand how designing a building had environmental impact on the earth, but like now we do. And now we are trained to be a better designer in terms of sustainability. And for me, right now, I feel like there's a lack of understanding of how our day-to-day design impacts people in terms of, like racial equity, justice, all this stuff. And I'm hoping for the better future where like, we understand how design impacts that so that we can like correct ourselves accordingly. Like for example, the Rondo community, right? Like designing cities where we cut right through a very important neighborhood, like things like that, that at the time, it was a very deliberate choice. And I don't know if they deliberately doing that, but like that lack of understanding the long-term impact, right? Like for me, I'm seeing that in all the disciplines in design, that one day we'll get there, we'll understand how products impact people, how graphics impact people, web, all these things. Yeah, I'm hopeful.
Art, just one other piece on this. I mean, all of these answers are very powerful. And I'll just say they all feel like they are kind of being put on you as individuals to fix a lot of this. And I worry a lot about that, about like particularly asking people of color to be the people to like lead fixing in inequitable system that we've designed. And so I am curious if any of you have thoughts about, in addition to us each individually doing these things that you're talking about, of being there for each other and trying to create these spaces and listen, if there's other ways, thinking about the academic space, the professional space, that we need to maybe restructure things or encourage certain practices in a more systemic way that will open some of this up, where it doesn't then just sort of fall on a strong individual to like come in and do that work by themselves.
Yeah, for me, I mean, thinking back to my education in the architecture school, and I went to U of M, I remember the only women architect that I learned about was Zaha Hadid. And there were so many women's architects out there, but I didn't learn about them until grad school when I had to do research myself. So it's like, and aside from that, let alone like architects of color or like, architecture from other countries, like all of the things I learned about were from like the Greek, the Pantheon, like the more like the white core things that has been there for centuries and we're still learning about it. But there's so many other great architecture that we don't learn about or hear about from other countries. So for me, like parts like that, it's like a micro things that I feel like everyone can question on their own thing and the things they do in everything, right? Like individually, we all contribute in some way. And for me, like my professor could do that. I could have added that, or suggest that to my professor. But yeah, like even Catherine doing that in her line of work, like that's amazing. But like we all have our own power to make change.
Yeah, call it the loop. Whether you consistently sustain that same loop or challenge that loop and say, could this be done differently? And to Bo's point, could we educate something differently? Could we put wealth somewhere differently? Could we support people through mentorship differently? Creating a new loop that provides a new evolved future. But it takes, like you said, Tane, it might be like I welcome the challenge. Others may not. You want to bring a conversation around Black lives, I'm here to have that conversation with you. But that may not be for someone else, because I believe in establishing and evolving a loop that is more equitable and really being specific about the loop.
This has been really fabulous. We have just about 5 minutes left, and I ended the last session. I know it goes fast. I ended the last session like this, and I wanted to do it again. This was designed in 7, and so you only got 7 minutes to talk. Is there anything that you didn't get to, or something that you just really wish you could still say or add to sort of what you were doing in your talk? That if it were designed in 9, you would have said. I don't know, Catherine, anything that you would add now if you had an extra minute or so from your talk?
No, I said it all in 7 minutes. I just want to reiterate that, and this is kind of like feeds off the past question. Like, none of us can do it alone. And I think, you know, if we're feeling like we're in a rut, there's so many people that we can reach out to and talk with, and everyone has different strengths. And again, sometimes what you need is to just take a step back or pause, or, you know, just listen. Or I think what I would try to encourage of all creators and all designers is to like try to just relieve the constant like stress and pressure that we put on ourselves all the time, and just allow ourselves that time to just breathe.
Yeah, that's great. Reggie?
Yeah, you know, I was thinking, well, first I was thinking that came to my head was I'm not a video game person, so that whole Zelda piece was really new to me. And but eye-opening in the same fashion, because when I did realize the connection between playing Zelda and what I wanted to talk about, I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. So anyway, just that video game comment. But to Catherine's point, it's like, you know, as designers, we have to be open to collaboration and also kind of pulling in people that you trust and rely on that may give you a different insight. And because you can't do this on your own, you have to like go out there and connect in a way. And you know, even introverts and extroverts, we're all different. But like as an introvert, you need that connection in a way, and be open to that. That connection becomes fruitful depending on how do you foster that relationship, and you never know where ideas come from, and usually it's a banter and a tension that helps evolve yourself to get to where you want.
Thank you for that. I thoroughly second that. Liz Spencer, any other things that you would have tacked on or added?
You know, the challenge to do it in 7, you had to focus. And I was like, I could do this, I could do that. So I think I pushed myself to be very concise and to the point. But going back to the beginning, when I said being inspired by movies, I watched The Patriot growing up, and, you know, like aim small, miss small is something I always bring up with things that even though the reference in the movie is about, you know, shooting and using arrows, but when you want to do something and you want to make sure that you do it right, having a small target, accomplishing that target, and then making the target a little bit bigger. And if you want to take on something that feels too big, find that focus point. Aim small, miss small, you hit it, let's bring in people to do something bigger together. So I think that would be the only thing I would add in the vein of collaboration. You still have to do your part. And if you find the thing that you can manage by aiming small and missing small, maybe you can bring other people along to do bigger things.
That's beautiful. I love that. And Bo, you got to both close our speaker series, and I'm going to give you the last bite at the apple here for if there's anything else that you wanted to leave us with.
Amazing. Yeah, for me, in the sense of taking leap of faith, one thing that's really helped me in, you know, like making decision, making pivot in things, was giving myself the freedom and understanding that all the people don't care about you as much as you think they do. You know, that like you think that they're watching, but really they're not. So like giving yourself that permission to just create shitty work, to just try it and do it. Like, yeah, just do it.
That is a great tagline for some business. It's going to grab that. I love it. Well, do shitty work. Design at 7, everybody. No, this has been absolutely phenomenal. And I actually closed our last session by saying something similar to this, but I'll say it again because I think it bears repeating that. Thank you all so much for sharing these stories. And also thank you all very much for being open and vulnerable and willing to share your stories, because I think that there's sometimes a perception, kind of as you're saying, Bo, like that, oh, you all are a panel of people, and so you must be experts and have everything figured out from top to bottom. And the truth is that we are all in process and we are all figuring stuff out. And the big lesson for me from this session and our last one is we can call on each other, we can do this together, and we will get a lot farther in where we're trying to go. So thank you all so much for taking this time. Everybody, if you can do one more round of applause. I see a lot of hands there. Catherine Sterner, Bosin Chai, Reggie Reyes, and LaSpencer Walker. A fabulous panel. This is the second of our 2 Design in 7 Q&As that we did. The other one, as well as the video of all 7 of the talks that we had, are online, and I am sure that you will be, if you are here, you are almost certainly going to get links to see both of those again and share them with others if you found this inspiring and helpful. But for now, I will say thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Loved getting to do this. Thank you to our panel. And we'll see you all again next year for Design in 7, when, fingers crossed, we will be together again in person. Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Yay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.